Thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you all turning up for this event, and it's great to see a full room. There's nothing worse than agreeing to put on a presentation than you're talking to friends and relations. So it's good to have you all here. I want it to be an interactive session. I don't want it to be a lecture. So please ask questions as we go. You don't even have to put your hand up. So feel free to speak up if anything occurs to you that you would like clarified along the way. If it's something of a specific nature and you want me to address your own circumstances, I'd be happy to do that, but I prefer to do it offline. But if it's anything of a general nature that you feel comfortable sharing with the room, then let's do that. I was asked if I would be able to link the issues of financial advice with health and well-being. And I thought it was the easiest thing to connect, and hopefully you'll see why in just a couple of minutes. But by way of a bit of background, next month marks 40 years since I started my career as a financial advisor. Yeah, I started when I was 5. It doesn't feel like 40 years, and every time I think about when I would retire, I say to myself that I'll stop doing it when I stop enjoying it, and I stop feeling like I'm giving some value. At this point in time, I'm not expecting to do that anytime soon, so I'll keep plugging away at the career as long as I'm allowed to. And that's an interesting point in itself, because if anyone's kept abreast of recent changes in my profession, they're not giving sufficient recognition of prior learning, and I started my career before there was even the option to get a university qualification in financial planning or something remotely close to it. So my applied science degree that I did and graduated back in 1977 is pretty darn useless as far as this career goes. But be that as it may, whatever study I have to do, I'll do to keep on doing this. We're talking about wealth and wellness. Is there a connection? And I'm hopefully going to show you that there is. Firstly, what we're going to talk about is a practical guide on being wealthy. Now, I'd love to say that I could lay claim to that term. I coined it, but I found out it's been used before, which is no surprise, because obviously I'm not the first person to come to the conclusion that the 2 points are intrinsically linked. And why they are, before I get onto that, this is what I have to do. It's the proverbial disclaimer that says, in essence, those words mean what's written there in red. Don't do anything until you get advice that's specific to you and it's in writing. Okay? Anything I'm talking about today is just of a general nature and may not be relevant to you. Okay. Can anyone relate to this specifically when it comes to their money? Hands up. No, I can. Now that's no surprise, because what the stats tell us is this. The American Psychological Association did a survey. The conclusions of that were that finances were the #1 cause of stress. So top of the list. And what financial stress can lead to is a whole bunch of things, none of which you want. Insomnia, hair loss, memory loss, reduced libido, skin conditions, just to name a few. Now obviously those things relate to any kind of stress, but if financial stress is the #1, then clearly avoiding those is to be something you would want to tackle at all costs. What about your personal lives? Relationships Australia did a survey, I think it was about 6 years ago, but I'd be surprised if the conclusions were any different. They found out that financial stress was the #1 cause of relationship breakdown, and 71% of survey respondents, and it was a fairly big cohort as well, they said that financial stress would be the primary thing that would push them apart as a couple. So clearly, keeping on top of your finances is an important thing from a number of points of view. So if we're going to talk about getting your financial house in order, what's the first step? And I come up with this one all the time because I encounter people in a number of different circumstances, and almost invariably they have this in common. I look at their situation and it's way more complex than it needs to be. Hands up any of you who think you've got more bank accounts than you probably ideally need. I'm sure there'd be more if I gave you time to put your hands up. The other side of the coin of that is the first thing we look at for people is to simplify your financial affairs. To keep track of them and finances are complex enough when you don't really understand them intimately. They're complex enough when you do, let alone if it's something you don't address on a daily basis. So clearly, one of the first steps you can make to improve things for yourself is to not make it any more complicated than it needs to be. So what I've done is I've tried to step out what, oh, by the way, I should have mentioned earlier, take notes by all means, but I will make available to you a copy of all the slides, so that if there's anything on a slide that you think you're going to write down, you don't necessarily need to. So here's my health regime for getting your finances in order. These are the things you must have. Okay? If you're buying a house or paying it off, you've obviously got to have a home loan. One. If you've got one of those, you should also have an offset account and use that as your primary savings vehicle. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. You should have a debit card. Notice I'm saying not a credit card. Credit cards are fine, but they are just another loan. And I don't know if you've been listening to the mainstream media lately, but Australia has one of the worst records in the world for credit card debt. And that's probably because in a country like Australia, they're the easiest things to get. They're giving the kids, the people who graduate from here this year, a month after they walk out the door, can have a credit card. But they can go out and buy thousands of dollars worth of things without any understanding of how they're going to pay that back. Have a credit card by all means, but the advantage of a debit card is you can use it in the same situations that you can use a credit card, but it doesn't have its own separate balance, and more importantly, it doesn't have a high teens or worse interest rate on it, because it's actually just giving you access to your own money on that offset account, ideally, that I talked about before. If you're going to invest, and I would suggest that most people should, and barring any changes following on from a potential change of government in the next few months, currently, if you borrow money to invest, it's tax effective to do so. May not be after that, or not to the same extent at least. You've got to have a super fund, obviously. In this country, we all do if we're employed, and we all should even if we're not, or working for ourselves. But notice I put only one. Hands up anyone who's got more than one super fund. Okay. Fairly typical. It's, unless there's a specific reason to have more than one, and it's rare, but it does exist, then usually we recommend that you consolidate them for a whole host of reasons. Simplicity being one of the main ones. Reduction in fees is another. Being able to keep track of it's another again. And you can, when you've got your own superannuation fund and you're aware of which one it is and where it is, it's very easy to make sure that it's being dealt with, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later on, the way that you want it to be and what is appropriate to your circumstances, as opposed to just going into a default account that is available where you're being employed at the time. A life insurer. Almost everyone needs life insurance and its related beasts. There are, I won't quiz you on what the 4 types of personal insurance are, but just to make life simple, and we will come back and deal with these in a bit more detail later on. You can cover your life, total and permanent disablement. In other words, if you cannot work again, there's a lump sum payout. Trauma, also known as medical catastrophe or critical illness insurance. And the 4th one is income protection. As I said, I'll cover them in a bit more detail later on.
Wayne, can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely.
Am I naive to believe that with your super, you are covered for most of those points there, so why would I have a separate life insurance?
Usually...
Except for have a larger amount, have 2
Exactly. Everyone has an amount of cover, and it varies from person to person and their circumstances, a whole raft of things. Examples would be, if you're the primary or the sole breadwinner and your other half doesn't work, then clearly what you represent is a paycheck. And in your absence or your inability to produce that paycheck, we need to address how we replace you. That's different if you both work, and therefore there's still going to be an income coming in your absence. So the numbers are different for different people. The default provisions with employer funds, you are all fortunate because you belong to a fund where some of those things are provided by default. That's not always the case. There's some proposals pending at the minute that they remove the default cover altogether and make it so that you have to apply it. There's differing schools of thought on that, but if you're an 18-year-old who's just joined the workforce and some of your super is going into paying for insurance that you probably don't need, then maybe that's a valid point. But suffice to say, everyone's needs are different and they rarely align with what's in the super fund. And particularly the number 3, trauma, that is not available through superannuation. If it was, if you had your trauma cover inside of super, a trauma like a heart attack, for example, I'm going to talk about when it would pay out a little bit later, that doesn't meet what the superannuation regulations refer to as a condition of release, which means the insurance company might pay the benefit, but it gets stuck in your super fund, which is great. The super fund got a boost, but you need the money now. So it's a potential trap. Similar things can happen with your income protection. And something else we'll talk about a little bit down the track is total and permanent disablement and when that can pay out to you as distinct from when it can come via super, okay? And home and contents insurance, I put together because if you own a home and you have your personal possessions and furniture and so on, they should be with the same insurer. Can anyone think of why that might be?
Because you're not paying double amount of...
There is that. There are some economies of scale, definitely, but the more important reason is, are the carpets and the curtains and the light fittings, are they home, part of the home or part of the contents?
Part of the home.
Yeah, Reg policy. So if you're with 2 different insurers, they get into an argument about which one wants to pay you because neither does. Whereas if they're both on one policy, the same people are paying you, so it's moot. And just that alone can make a big difference to the benefit of having a policy. And the last one is a car insurer. Obviously, the reasons for having car insurance are fairly self-evident, and it needs to be comprehensive so that if, even if it's not your fault, you can get your car replaced or repaired if you need to. Okay. Hands up all those who have a home loan. Oh, good. So this isn't going to bore anyone, or not too many by the look of it. Now, it surprises me that this isn't common knowledge, but this is fundamental. The most important thing is the interest rate you pay. It's not everything, but it's a pretty significant place to start. Because at the end of the day, the amount of money you're borrowing, the amount the bank is charging you for the privilege of borrowing that money is a fairly important part of the equation. We've seen situations where we've taken someone off a 4% interest rate and got them 3%. Now, 1% is a fair bit, and when it's 25% of the interest you're paying, it's a heck of a lot. It makes a significant difference over time as to how quickly you can pay the loan back. And what a lot of people don't realise is that if you look and go out shopping, you can find these things. You don't have to stay with the bank you're with just because you're with them. Make interest-only payments as distinct from principal and interest payments. That might come as a surprise to you as to why I would say that. Anyone ponder as to what might be the wisdom in that? Because you want to pay the debt off, don't you? Okay. But if you make interest-only payments, and then you also have what I spoke about before, your home loan offset account, if it's the appropriate kind, and most of them these days are, if your home loan has an offset account alongside of it, every dollar that's in your offset account today is as good as having been paid off the home loan. So it's reducing the amount of interest you're paying on that home loan by the interest that's applicable to that $1 until you take the money out and use it. So even if it's only there for a day, a week, a month, 3 months, because it's a quarterly bill you're going to use it for, or saving for the big overseas holiday or whatever, while you're doing your saving, that money is reducing the interest that you're paying on your home loan. And I'll show you how the actual numbers work in a moment. Like I said just then, you pay your bills when they're due, but not early. Because if you're not getting a discount for paying a bill before time, while your money's sitting in your offset account, it's saving you home loan interest rate. Who knows how they calculate interest on home loans? Daily, exactly. That's much more common knowledge now than it was when I first started advising on these things. But once you realise that, you think, well, even for just one day, if I've got $1,000 to pay on a bill, but it's not due yet, while the $1,000 is sitting in my offset account, it's actually saving me interest on my home loan. The compounding effect of that over time is significant, and just changing the way you pay your bills can knock a year or two off your home loan, all other things being equal. So we always recommend that. Now, of course, my friend Scott Pate and others will talk about the bucket strategy and having different places to keep money for different purposes. That works very practically, except for this reason. So if you're a disciplined person, or if you don't have the discipline but you're prepared to have a spreadsheet that keeps track of what money you're saving for what purpose notionally, then by far I encourage people to use an offset account, because you come out so far in front, as long as you're responsible, that you won't regret it. Now, this is an important one. Separating personal and investment debt, okay? Do we get a tax deduction for home loan interest rates? No. Right. And until and unless Labor come into power, we get one for borrowing money to invest. So if you're going to borrow money to invest, you obviously want to keep that separate to your home loan. And if the home loan is not tax deductible, but the investment loan is tax deductible, and by and large they're at the same rate, which one do you think you're going to want to pay off first? The home loan, right? Because it's being paid for with after-tax dollars instead of before tax. It makes a big difference. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Don't make principal repayments on the investment loan until your home loan's cleared, okay? I'll talk about that in a minute, or right now before I move on to this. Do we have a... Oh. I'm in a room full of teachers. I did ask if I was going to have a whiteboard.
Is that a whiteboard one or is that a permanent?
Yeah, I use a permanent one, do I? Whiteboard, no?
Yeah, that's a whiteboard.
Okay. Apologies if you can't all see this from over there, but if this is your home loan, and then you borrow money against the equity in your home to invest, and let's say that they're both at 4%, and let's say that your marginal tax rate, just to keep the math simple, is 40 cents on the dollar, okay? That means that the net effect of that is that that one is costing you, that one's costing you 4% after tax. This one's costing you 2.4% after tax, because you get to claim the interest as a tax deduction. So, if you've got a loan at 4%, a loan at 2.4%, which one do you reckon you want to pay off first?
The highest one.
The highest one. And would you pay off any of that, unless you had to, before the balance of that one was zero?
No.
Okay. So one other step that we put into the equation, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I tend to lose people when I do, but putting it simply, if this is tax deductible, then you get money back from the taxman when you claim the interest as a tax deduction. You're investing to get a return, so hopefully you're getting some dividends or some rent or both coming back from your investments. You put both of those things in your offset account, and guess what? The money you borrowed to invest is actually paying off your non-deductible debt even faster than you were before. May I hang on to that for a minute? Any questions on that? We call that strategy debt recycling, and you can actually end up with no non-deductible debt much quicker just by embarking on an investment strategy, so you're winning twice. Okay, who's seen all the compare the pair ads on superannuation? Yeah. Sick of them?
Yeah.
I know I am. We say, don't compare the pair. I'll give you the background to those ads. They're industry super fund ads. They've got a vested interest in putting those ads on the television. They don't like me, because I normally don't recommend them. But they want to get money into industry super funds. I could talk about whether or not the unions benefit from that, but that's a side issue. The point is, they're encouraging you to use them. Yeah, the track record can be all right, but it is exceedingly difficult to compare two super funds. We say it's a fool's errand, and I'll tell you why. There are just too many variables. Two people can be in the same superannuation fund, in the same mix, balance, growth, whatever it is, and change one underlying asset, because these days you can literally do that with just about any superannuation fund in the marketplace, and you aren't comparing the same two things. So what is the point of going out shopping and going, let's have a look at, Catholic Super versus Rest or Aussie Super or whatever, a retail fund that I might recommend. If it's purpose built to suit your needs, then it's going to do the job you need it to do. And if you've got somebody actually physically making it stay that way and changing it as your circumstances change, you've got a much greater chance of it doing what you need it to do than just taking something off the shelf and hope it works for you. So as I said, you change one variable between those two funds and the comparisons are irrelevant. So looking up where it says what the performance has been gives you an idea in theory, but it's literally that. It's only theory. Okay. Fees. That's what the industry super funds tell you is the all-important thing. Yeah, sure, they're important, but not the most important thing. In fact, not by a long way. They're one of the factors, but they're certainly not the most significant one. And the best way I can show that to you is by a very simple example. Here's Fund A. It's showing a return profile of 5% a year, and it's costing you 1% in fees. So, okay, a bit light on, but it's all right. Fund B, on the other hand, whoop, went too far. Fund B has a return profile of 8%, its fees is 1.5%. Which one of those would you rather have?
I suppose the second one.
Yep, me too. Okay, that's a gross oversimplification, but the reality is it's about what you're getting for what you're paying, not just what you're paying, obviously. So you can be in a more expensive fund than a cheaper one, but the expectation is by virtue of that higher cost, it usually relates to the way they run it. It's probably going to be more hands-on than a set and forget fund where you pick one off the shelf. It's definitely going to be aligned to your goals and objectives. That's a very big tick. Second one is it's probably going to outperform the other. Can we guarantee it? No. Will we ever know definitively if it did? No, unless you run a hypothetical comparison and then look backwards. But we would argue that yes, you're looking for economical options automatically, but when it comes down to similar costs, you want a better outcome. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The 4 personal risks, we were talking about insurance before and I listed them. First one is premature death. The risks of that are pretty obvious. So is what happens in the event of a death. If that's you, someone gets a bunch of money. So it's pretty straightforward. There's very rarely any argument about payouts on death. That even suicide is covered in most life insurance policies in Australia after 13 months. So it's rare that there's an argument about whether or not a death benefit is going to be paid out. But that's pretty straightforward, and we talked earlier about how we calculate what individuals' needs are in those circumstances. The other 3 risks are much more convoluted. I'll spend as little or as much time on them as you want. If you've got any questions, please ask them as we go through. Second one's total and permanent disablement, and we already mentioned that it can be inside super or outside. If you hold your total and permanent disablement benefit inside of superannuation, and why would you do that? Why would you put that cover inside super? You get a tax deduction by and large for putting money into superannuation, so you're using a tax deductible dollar to pay for your insurance, whereas if you pay for it personally, it's after-tax dollars that you have to use. Okay, so that is, and we have to put this on the table, that is at the expense obviously of your retirement benefit, but if it comes down to balancing the budget, and that's a priority, then we would do that. Except, if your total and permanent disablement covers inside of super, it can only pay to you if you can't work again. So that's it, game over, you're retiring as it were due to ill health. Whereas, particularly for a room such as yourselves where you're all qualified people, you might not be able to do what you want to do because of ill health or injury, but you might not necessarily want to keep working. If all you've got's the first one, they're not going to pay you, because the 2 conditions are the condition has stopped you, whatever you've suffered has stopped you working, and you aren't. Whereas with the second one, if it says you can't do what you used to do, but you want to learn carpentry or something and see if you can sell furniture, knock yourself out. They still pay you. It's a very important reason to address that as to whether or not you should have and want to have own occupation cover, as the industry refers to it, which we can split so that we can put any occupation cost inside your super funds, you get the tax benefit, and you pay the personal bit outside. And that's usually the best way to put it together. Trauma?
With TPD, I have heard that it's quite a difficult one to prove, and that they can be quite slow in saying that yes, you are actually totally. Is there truth in that?
Yeah, absolutely there is. And there are some horror stories, some of them that came out in the Royal Commission, and this isn't supposed to have segued into a plug, but I can't help it, is that we put a lot of time and effort and energy into researching insurance companies. In fact, my licensee pays a consultant to continually research the marketplace. And I'll give you an example. I've brought this up with clients before and they didn't necessarily know about it, but prior to the Royal Commission, the Commonwealth Bank was going through a world of hurt for that very reason. Not paying claims when they should have been, making potential claimants jump through hoops, sending PIs after them, following them around with cameras and microphones. And we were told, anyone you can get out of ComInsure, get them out. And the proof of that advice came out a couple of years down the track. So, is that an absolute guarantee you'll get paid out when you want them to? No, but it's as close to a guarantee as you can get. So we put a lot of effort into that. And sometimes you might be paying a little bit more than the cheapest you could have got, but it's so that, because let's face it, and I'll talk about this in a bit of detail in a minute, when you take out insurance, the only reason you're doing it, because it's a grudge purchase, isn't it? You want them to pay if you've had something happen to you that it's said in the policy document. And if they can argue the toss, that's something you really don't want to deal with when you're suffering from an illness or an injury. Now, what the industry refers to as trauma cover, I can tell you how it started because it's quite interesting as to how it evolved. You've heard of the Barnard brothers, Christian and Marius, the heart surgeons from South Africa. They discovered way back in the 80s that they had two distinct groups of patients and their recoveries were significantly different. And they were trying to analyse why one group were recovering really quickly and the other group weren't, and the difference between the two was their financial situation. And they went to South African insurance companies and said, can you design a policy that pays out when people have a heart attack? And that led to this thing called trauma or medical catastrophe insurance. It covers a whole raft of things and pays out on events, so it doesn't matter what the outcome is. Like, you can have a positive mammogram for the girls, have a lumpectomy, by and large, and be back healthy within a matter of weeks or months, and the policy generally, depending on which one you've got, would pay out. Or you can be significantly compromised and be dealing with health issues for a long time, but the payout is on diagnosis, not in terms of severity. Heart attack, cancer and stroke cover 95% of your claims right there. So there are other things, but those three are the main reasons for claiming. And what's the difference between that and your total and permanent disablement cover? And you could get both, is if you have one of those events, it pays you when it happens. The other, it has to have compromised your ability to earn an income permanently. Does that make sense? And you can see why there would be a need to have some of this as well as total and permanent disablement cover. The last one is income protection. Essentially, what it does is the insurance company steps up and replaces typically 75% of your income that you are no longer earning through illness or injury. Now, those are the only two things. It doesn't include redundancy or unemployment. And the reason I put that there is we get asked that quite often.
Does it stop at a certain age? Like, say, retirement age is 65 and you're still working and you're 70, does it stop?
Cover or benefit? Because they aren't the same thing.
I don't know, it's just the cover, I suppose.
Yeah. These days you can buy a policy that will cover you till age 70, depending on your occupation.
Yeah.
And the benefits will also pay till 70.
Yeah.
So if you said, oh, I might work that long, and obviously what I'm trying to protect is what my paycheck is going to be worth to me over the rest of my working life, then it would make sense to have a long-term benefit. And that segues nicely into this point. This is the golden rule for insurance needs analysis. And I tell people this all the time. What I say is, this is what you have to consider. Something's happened to you and you're ringing me and you're telling me what happened and you want to know if there's a payout coming. What do you want my response to be?
Yes, there is.
Obviously, yes. How big a paycheck do you want me to get my hands on? The biggest one we could justify based on the premiums you're prepared to pay. Now, obviously, there's a finite point at which it becomes beyond the point of being realistic. It's a bit like how much you're going to spend on lotto. And some people probably spend a lot more than they should, but it's a similar thing. It's to a point it's worthwhile. Beyond that, you've probably got to question the priorities. But the significant role that we play is in helping you determine how much you need in your particular circumstances, and then we review it annually because things can change quickly. Significant change up or down in income for either or both of you, or one stops working, or you've moved to a bigger home with a bigger mortgage and suddenly your needs are greater, or another child's arrived, or whatever the case may be. This is a moving feast, so we need to continually review it. Well, you could win lotto and not need as much insurance anymore. Managing cash flow. Who struggles with that? Come on, be honest. I'd be very surprised if most of you are good at it. Although I have to say, there are some tools around, and we help clients with these things. There are some very efficient tools around for helping you do this. But by and large, keeping track of your money is very important, but there's one critical rule. Make sure you don't have too much month left at the end of the money. Because otherwise we find ourselves back in that situation of looking at the alarm clock. So it's simply a question of, as they used to say, cutting your coat according to your cloth. And keeping track of it and making sure that everything is budgeted and allowed for. Because they always talk about, what do they call it, disposable income. I've never met anyone who had any. But what everyone has, by and large, is discretionary income. You can, have another bottle of wine, or you can save for that holiday. That's what we help you work out, is where you set the priorities, so that you don't always get frustrated by the fact that you don't ever seem to be meeting some of those goals that you've got for yourself. Any questions on that? Okay. We refer to the rule of holes. Anyone know what it is? Can you relate to that guy?
Yep.
Okay. Rule of holes is, when you're in one, quit digging. And how that applies to your financial situation is quite often people can't see a way out. And it's simply a case of, okay, let's take a step back and analyse what you're doing with your money and what we need to change and what we can readily change to improve it, to help you get to where you want to be down the track. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay. I hear this one a lot. In fact, I had somebody come to see me yesterday. They're actually referred by a journo, which is an interesting source of a new client referral. And one of her questions was, she said, what do you think of the idea of me taking money out of my super to pay off the mortgage? Okay, be honest, anyone think that's a good idea? Don't be afraid to put your hand up, because a lot of people think it is.
Does it depend on how old you are, really? Like if you're actually on retirement and you had a home loan still?
Yeah, possibly.
You might think it a good idea then.
Exactly. Except, and we're going to talk about what the numbers tell us. And I'll preface the comment by saying it's not all about the numbers. I'll come back to that. But let's see what the numbers tell us. Here's the scenario as it is right now. And of course, this is always subject to change. So a strategy like this would need to be reviewed on a regular basis. Since productivity super, as they used to call it, the super guarantee, anyone know when that came in? 89 was when productivity super came in. Remember, it was 3%?
Yeah.
And then they called it the super guarantee. That came in at 92. Yeah. Since 1992, they've been measuring it. 7.5% return is the net average annual return of a balanced superannuation fund. That's through the GFC. It's not bad, is it? Okay. Now, our job is to try and do better than that, but if you only got that and you did your sums on that, you'd probably be okay. Average home loan rate at the minute is about 4%. It could and should be 3 if you shop around, but typically your standard variable is sitting at about 4%. Okay? All right, so what does that mean? If you put it, that's not supposed to be $1 million. If you put $1 in superannuation, or whatever for that matter, it's almost twice the return of paying the same amount into your home loan. 7.5 as against the 4. Okay? So in terms of what the super would have earned you as against what paying down your home loan would have saved you in interest. Okay? It's even better if it's tax deductible. So if you can salary sacrifice and you've got capacity to do that, and you're using tax deductible dollars to put into your super, then it gets even better, because what's happening then, contributions tax on super contributions, 15%. So 85 cents goes into your superannuation fund, ignoring fees, of course, talking about what is actually in play within the fund. 85 cents out of every dollar actually gets invested, using our 7.5% figure that we were talking about before. That equates to 6.375% return on your original dollar of salary. Does that make sense to everyone? If you had the whole dollar to use, that's the effective return on it. Let's compare that to the home loan now then. So, if you're earning more than $80,000, your marginal rate is, in round figures, 40%. Might be worse post-election, might be better, but for most it'll probably be worse. So we'll just use 40 as a figure. So that leaves you 60 cents to put into your home loan, doesn't it? Because the taxman takes his bit first. Yeah. And we're talking about your home loan as distinct from an investment loan, because then you would have the whole dollar. So only 60 cents is going to go on the home loan. So 60 at 4%. It's a 2.4% return. How's that compare to your 6.375? 2.5 times as good. More than. Okay? So significantly different. So what are we saying? If you can, and you've got capacity to do so, and you put extra money into superannuation tax effectively, does everyone know that you don't have to salary sacrifice to get a tax deduction on super contributions now? Because that's the truth of it. Now, fortunately you work for an employer that makes it real easy, but if you said, you know what, I'll just wait till the end of the year and bung some money in if I've got it, then you just drop it in your super fund and you get to claim a personal tax deduction for it. Better still, if you're planning on doing that, what we would encourage you to do is, instead of doing that and then waiting until you do your tax return to get your refund, we'd actually, depending on the amount you were planning on putting in, we'd actually get you to tell the tax office you were doing it and get the tax back even sooner. But that's another very personal strategy that we sometimes work on. But you can see why, based on the numbers, it makes sense to put extra money into superannuation as opposed to paying off your mortgage. And people say, okay, well, then how do I pay my mortgage off? With the extra super you just bought yourself, obviously. And the extra super is going to be significantly more than the home loan is, because of the earnings differential. You get to keep the difference. Next question. When do you reckon you'd pay the bank back?
Never.
Well, ideally, yeah, but only when they ask for it, right? Because even if you've retired and you still have a home loan and you've still got super, it might be in pension phase then, which means it's not even paying tax, and it's still earning that same rate of return. If the bank's only charging you 4 and your super's earning you 7.5, why on earth would you want to take it out of the 7.5 to give it back to the bank at 4 or 3 if you've negotiated a better rate? Until and unless they were asking you to, you'd hang on to it for as long as you could, wouldn't you? And even beyond that, you could possibly talk the bank into letting you have a reverse mortgage and hang on to it even longer. That's another conversation in and of itself. But in theory, you could have your money in superannuation working in your favour while you were hanging on to the bank's money, and you give it back to them when they tell you that they want it, and not before. Now, of course, that's what the numbers say, but it's not all about the numbers. there's a whole bunch of reasons why you wouldn't do this. Who can think of why you wouldn't? I wouldn't do it if I was on the good side of 40. Because what age can a person who's 39 get access to their super?
60.
60.
Yeah.
If you're 39 and you can't touch your super until you're 60, it's another half of your lifetime again, isn't it? If preservation age, which is the term they use for when you can access your super, was going to move, which way would it move between now and then, do you reckon, up or down?
No.
What are the odds of it happening, given we're all living longer?
Yeah.
My dad just celebrated his Bernie knows my dad, celebrated his 92nd birthday just last week. One of the reasons I'm still working, I figured I'd be retired nearly as long as I was working. If that's the case, and there's more and more people living that sort of life expectancy, getting access to your money at 60, spending it all and then joining the Centrelink queue might be fine in theory, but the country can't afford it, can it? So the odds of a 39-year-old getting access to their money at 60 is remote, in my personal opinion. So would I tell a 39-year-old to put extra money into superannuation? Not on your Nelly, unless they'd already cleared the debt and had no plans to go back into debt. But it's horses for courses. Most important thing about this, or any other financial decision for that matter, is this. Does it pass the sleep test? Sound familiar, Bernie? Will the decision that you're making with your money, based on our encouragement and recommendation, allow you to do that? Because it doesn't matter how good the numbers are and how efficient the strategy looks to you, if that's not happening, don't do it. This lady who came to see me yesterday, we were only talking hypothetically because it was the first meeting we'd ever had, and she said if that's what you ended up recommending, I'd probably go halfway because I would just feel better if my mortgage was going down, but I can see the sense of putting as much money as I can afford to into superannuation. So you might have two bob each way, but understand the costs and the benefits and make a decision accordingly. And that's the key point, is knowing what it is you're doing with your money. I want to talk about this thing. Anybody got any idea what I'm talking about? The elephant in the room? What might it be? I alluded to it at the start of the presentation.
Yes.
Yeah. Because if I don't talk about it, you're wondering about it. It was horrendous. There's no other way to put it. Talk about embarrassing. That your profession and your industry gets dragged through the mud like that. And some of the things, I mean, I knew that some of the big instos, they were playing a pretty mean game when it came to their customers, my clients. And we do as best we can to avoid you being exposed to any of that. But some of what came out was horrendous. Hopefully what's come out of it is that you can be assured, or at least a bit more than you would have been 12 months ago, that if you go down this route that we're talking about of seeking advice, that you might get a better outcome than you might have done pre-Royal Commission. Personally, and it's the way we run our business, that we think the important things are is make sure that the person you're dealing with doesn't have any conflicted interests. In other words, they don't work for an institution that wants a certain amount of money to go a certain way. Offline, if you're interested, I will tell you about a conversation that happened between a certain former head of a bank and his successor, and why the successor is now he's the incumbent and the other guy's no longer in a job. But it's case in point as to what went on. So we're aware of it. We've very deliberately built a business that is completely non-aligned to any financial institution. If we recommend a financial product, it's because it suits your particular purposes and it's been selected to meet that need from what's available in the marketplace. It has nothing to do with how we are remunerated. We're paid by our clients, not by financial institutions. If anything we do results in something triggering a payment, that goes on the table to you as a fee credit. And I mention that because the only thing that does pay in our circumstances is insurance. It may change post-Royal Commission outworkings, but at this point in time, commission is still payable on insurance products. With our clients, if we are entitled to any commission, we just drop it on the table as a fee credit, and you pay whatever the differential is when there is a differential. Okay. When's the best time to start a financial plan?
Yesterday.
You know what your greatest ally is with a financial plan? This stuff. Time. And this is why. Magic of compounding returns. I'm probably telling you stuff you already know, given what some of you at least do for a living. But that green line is what happens over time with your finances and the money you're accumulating both inside and outside of super. And every year it's growing exponentially. Now if we take a year off, which year are we taking off? Is it this one down here? Where's my other button? Is it that year?
No.
Oh, it's that one up there. 1 year is the last year. You heard of the rule of 72? Rule of 72 says the compound rate of return you're getting divided into 72 is how often your money will double. Okay? So you're getting a 9% return, which we've managed to do over the last 24 years on our superannuation funds. Every 8 years your balance doubles if you're not including adding more money to it. So you lock 1 year off, and that's the years between 7 and 8 because you lost that year. That makes a significant difference to how much money you've got at the end of the day. So whether it's saving outside of super or saving inside of super, the sooner you start, the better. On that point, I didn't do a slide on it, but why would you use superannuation as your primary savings vehicle if your primary objective was retirement? Can anyone tell me? Why wouldn't you buy a rental property or put it in term deposits or whatever?
It's a bit of interest.
Yeah. Inside of superannuation, we talked about the tax rate being 15%. That applies to contributions and earnings. In fact, the contributions are only taxed because they're treated as earnings when they're tax deductible. And when you retire, if you're receiving a pension and you're no longer working, under the current rules, your super fund is paying zero tax. So unless you wanted the money before you got to retirement, why would you put it anywhere else than somewhere where it's going to end up being tax-free, including capital gains tax-free? So if you bought something inside your super fund and didn't sell it till you'd retired, the amount of tax you're going to end up paying on it when it is sold is zero. So if it's retirement money, it just self-selects to put as much money in there as you can afford to do so under the rules, and wait for it at the other end. And if you're lucky enough to be able to save beyond the limits as to how much you can put in there, then we'll talk about other ways of saving tax effectively. Okay, this is a little bit of a description about what we do and how we do it. Because when you talk about, how are we doing for time, by the way? Going all right? Nearly wrapped up. When you talk about dealing with a financial advisor, it basically just describes a qualification as distinct from the discipline and what the person might actually do in their business. So it covers the gamut, and there's lots of different shops, if I can call them that provide different services. So when it comes to seeking the services of a financial advisor, what you've got to do is align your needs and objectives with the business that you elect to deal with. And given the sorts of things that we're going to be talking about, and given how far out of your comfort zone we need to take you to help you achieve some of these objectives, the most important thing is that you feel comfortable with the person that you're dealing with. If you meet someone and for whatever reason, the way they go about it, their tie, whatever it is, you might even know what it is, but you walk out and you don't feel comfortable, keep looking. Because if you have misgivings at the start, you'll never be comfortable with that experience. I've picked up clients who've spent years dealing with an advisor and gone, just never felt right, and eventually I got sick of it. And that didn't necessarily mean there was anything wrong with the advisor, but they didn't feel okay. So it's important that you keep looking until you find someone that you just feel comfortable with. They get you, you get them, and you can work together because it's a partnership. We talk about having a financial chauffeur, okay? You know, if you had a limousine you get the dinky little uniform with the little peak cap, and you point at the front right-hand seat, and you tell that guy to get in there and drive, right? A little bit like that. Now, he's a bit younger than me. The chauffeur may not necessarily know, it's a bit like Uber, really. He may not know the quickest, most direct route, but he's going to get you there, and you don't even have to think about where he's going or how he's going. You know you're going to get where you're going pretty well on time. You more or less know what it's costing you, and you can relax and worry about whatever it is you'd rather be doing. And that's what we think is important. So we talk about being your financial chauffeur. We sit down together, we work out where it is you're trying to get to and in what time frame. And once we've worked out, we say, okay, let us do it, and we'll just keep touching base to make sure that it's working the way you want it to work. How involved do you need to be? As much as you want to be. If you say, your job, not worried about it, fine, we're okay with that. If you say, it's a partnership, I want to be in lockstep with you all the way, that's fine too. But guess what? It isn't a dual control vehicle. We're going to get tired real quick slapping your hand off the steering wheel. So while you're paying us, let us do the driving. If you want to drive, and you then figure out maybe you should hire the chauffeur back again, we'll probably be happy to come back and talk to you, but that's the way you should treat it. Okay? The reason we talk about that, why you would use an advisor. You've heard it before, you don't know what you don't know. Hands up anyone who hasn't learned anything today. Oh good, that was a test. It's always important that you're picking up new stuff, that was the whole point of you being here. But you don't know what you don't know. And it changes constantly. We spend so much of our time just studying. It's the first thing I do every day. I get these emails coming in about what's the latest and the greatest, and it's constant. Superannuation rules, someone once worked out, they changed every 20 days since back in the 80s when I started my career. So you can't keep abreast of it if you're just dabbling in it. If you want to out of interest, I don't know why you would, but go for it. But don't be reliant on yourself when it's too difficult. The financial decisions that you make need to be made objectively. Substitute objectively for unemotionally. Okay? And that's critical. And look, plumber's leaky tap, I can confess because, and I probably should, but because I take my own advice, or don't, more to the point, I make mistakes that I would never make with a client. And that's because I'm not making the decisions objectively. And here's the thing. You've heard the expression, you can't see the forest for the trees. You can't even see the tree if your nose is pressed up against the bark. And that's how most of us are with our own money. We're surrounded by it day to day, using your credit card, you know, tap and pay. It's the best and the worst thing that ever happened to money. It's just so easy, and we're immersed in it on a daily basis, much more than our parents were, perhaps, when they waited a week or a fortnight or a month to get a paycheck, and it was literally, well, it wasn't a check, it was an envelope full of cash. Who remembers those things? Yes. Yeah. And you actually walked around and paid for things with that folding stuff. Remember those days? These days, it's so hard to keep track of your money because you can literally, I can pay with this thing for God's sake. It's crazy. It's science fiction, but you can. Fun at the bar. But that's why it's important that somebody is working with you to make sure that you're not misstepping. Any questions? Okay. There's only one thing to say then. And that's, thanks for listening. Obviously you've all seen, I've got some promo gifts there that I've brought along for you, so please go out and advertise for me. That would be great. And you've all got my business card. If you want to make contact, ask questions, book a meeting, happy to do that at any time. Thanks once again.
Thank you.